Okay, let's jump right in. Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to really unpack the key insights from the sources you've bought us. And today we're tackling Bitcoin's performance, specifically around June 8th, 2025, based on your material.
Exactly. We're looking at what the data, the charts, the sort of macro environment tells us was driving the price right then.
Right, because the interesting thing from these sources, the real head scratcher, is how Bitcoin held pretty steady. I mean, above $105,000, even with some mixed signals flying around, and apparently some political drama mentioned. Let's get into why.
Yeah, okay. So first off, the price point itself. Your data shows Bitcoin closing around 105,576 data on June 7th. That was up 1.15% on the day.
Okay, 1.15%. And the sources point to U.S. jobs data as the immediate reason. Less work about a recession.
That seems to be the trigger for that particular day's gain, yeah. Good economic news often helps risk assets like Bitcoin. It uses market nerves.
But here's where it gets a bit weird, according to the material. The U.S. spot ETFs, they actually saw net outflows for the week, like money leaving.
That's right. Around $131.6 million in net outflows over the week.
Huh. So outflows, but the price is holding up. That feels counterintuitive. What's the source's take on that?
Well, it's a great point, and the sources dig into this a bit. They highlight that even with net outflows, there were strong inflows into specific ETFs. Think BlackRock's VanEck. Those saw money coming in.
Ah, okay. So it wasn't like everyone was selling, more like a reshuffling, or maybe smarter money moving in strategically.
That's the suggestion, yeah. Selective buying, perhaps more informed capital, happening even while some other money was exiting. It points to some complexity under the surface.
Interesting. Okay, what about the technicals, the charts? Your sources mention a big volume spike.
They do. Coinbase volume jumped 20%, hitting $1.8 billion. That's significant trading activity. Shows conviction, maybe?
And technically, there was a golden cross.
Yes, on June 5th. So for anyone listening, that's just when the shorter-term price average, the 50-day, crosses above the longer-term 200-day average, is generally seen as a bullish signal for the longer term.
And the RSI, that momentum thing.
The relative strength index, yeah, it's around 58 according to the data. So not yet in that overbought zone. Suggests there might have been, more room for the price to potentially climb.
Your sources also flagged a specific pattern. A cup and handle sounds like breakfast.
Huh. Yeah, it does look a bit like a teacup on a chart. It's a pattern analyst's watch. The material noted to look for a breakout above $105,500, especially if volume confirmed it. If that happened, the suggested intraday target was higher, maybe $106,500, even $107,000.
Okay, makes sense. Let's shift to on-chain. What is the actual Bitcoin network telling us based on this material?
Pretty bullish, actually. The sources mentioned increasing whale accumulation.
Whales.
The big holders, right?
Exactly. When they start buying more, it usually signals strong belief in higher prices. And another key thing, 62% of all Bitcoin hadn't moved in over a year.
Wow, 62% just sitting tight.
Yeah, that's high. It's called dormant supply. When it grows, it means long-term holders aren't selling. Less supply available. Often happens before a rally. Classic sign. So, summing up that part, shifting ETF dynamics, but strong technicals, strong on-chain signals. What about the bigger picture? Macro. Politics.
Macro-wise, things looked a little better for risk assets. Your sources say the perceived chance of a U.S. recession in 2025 dropped. It went from 30% down to 26% by June 8th.
And less recession risk is generally good for Bitcoin?
Generally, yes. Boosts confidence, makes investors more willing to take on risk.
The politics. There was something about Trump and Musk.
Yeah, the sources mentioned a feud between them, but crucially, they noted Bitcoin seemed completely unaffected. It just held steady above 105K. What the sources did note, though, was this lingering positive sentiment from some Trump-era ideas, like the strategic Bitcoin reserve concept. That was seen as a kind of background support.
Okay, so just reporting what the sources said there. No impact from the feud itself, but some underlying political sentiment possibly helping.
Correct.
So let's try and synthesize this. Based purely on these sources, what's the overall feeling? Bullish, bearish, mixed?
I'd say the synthesis leans cautiously optimistic, maybe. You've got the macro becoming slightly more supportive, potential Fed pivot hopes down the line. Yeah. Then the really strong on-chain stuff accumulation, that dormant supply, and the technicals like the Golden Cross. Together, your sources suggest these could point towards a potential rally, maybe even towards $120K plus.
Okay, potential upside. But what were the risks the sources flagged? Can't all be good news.
Definitely not. The main risk highlighted was still those net weekly ETF outflows. That $130 million leaving could still weigh on the price, no question.
Makes sense. Anything else?
Yeah, the correlation risk. Bitcoin still sometimes moves with stocks. Your sources mentioned it dropped, 5.2% on June 7th. That was when tech stocks dipped because of interest rate jitters. So broader market worries can still pull Bitcoin down.
And key price levels to watch, resistance and support.
Absolute critical. Resistance was flagged right around $105,880 to $106,000. Getting through that was seen as the key unlock for more upside.
And if it failed,
then the risk was a retest of support. Specifically, 104K was mentioned, but the key support level noted in the material was $105,230. Holding above that was important.
right. So pulling it all together one last time from this deep dive into your sources, Bitcoin's holding above 105K seems supported by a mix of improving macro, decent institutional interest signs despite some outflows, and solid technicals and on-chain data.
That's a good summary. The foundation seemed relatively firm around that 105K mark based on the snapshot in time.
And the things for you, the listener, to keep an eye on based on this material were really, can it stay above that 105K support zone, and can it break cleanly through 106K resistance?
Which leaves us with a really interesting question to ponder, doesn't it? You have these conflicting signals. Net outflows from ETFs overall, but then strong buying by whales and specific ETFs seeing inflows. How do you personally weigh those different forces? Which one do you think ultimately dictates where Bitcoin goes next? Something to think about.
A perfect place to leave it. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into your source material.